Hello, I'm a criminal defense attorney in California, and this is being filmed in 2020, so whatever year you may be watching this later on, but as of the filming of this video, it's 2020, and we are going through really what appears to be almost like a dystopian movie or novel or whatever you want to call it. At times they're surreal, right? Just not too long ago, something like this was unimaginable, although to epidemiological experts, this was inevitable, this pandemic. And so it's very interesting to see how human beings are acting under this sort of pressure. Most people, I think for the most part, are behaving themselves, and they're just trying to look out for themselves and their loved ones. And then you have people who are just mentally deranged and depraved. And I'm speaking of people who deliberately cough, sneeze at, or touch other people, just terrify them into thinking that they're going to contract the coronavirus. You see this. I've seen footage. There's footage of people in Wuhan, where this virus originated in 2019. There's one that really made an indelible impression on my mind. It was a woman who was deliberately coughing on the button board of the elevator and then touching it and sneezing at it, and it was very disgusting. But that's hardly the only place this sort of thing has happened. You're going to see an escalation of that. Some people just lose their minds, or their mind was already gone, and I don't know what makes them think that that is anything, remotely associated with dignified or human, behavior. And so anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's not impossible to us to imagine or conceive that something like that may happen to you. So meaning, you're in line at a grocery store, and out of frustration, somebody, tries to get in front of you or something and coughs at you as a way of terrorizing you. And I believe this has already happened to certain grocery store clerks, just people servicing the public, and you have somebody in line who's unreasonable and they do something like that to try to get their way. It's a form of terrorism. I mean, and if you think about it, it's assault, right? So the situation here is the question I've gotten from many, many, many people. We service people all up and down California accused of every conceivable type of behavior. But one of those things is, like, let's say that happens to you, and then you just, you punch, you strike back, you shove, you push, you commit some sort of act of violence on somebody that does that to you, right? Somebody who coughs at you, sneezes at you, and you're terrified that you were just infected with this horrific SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus. And so the thing about it is that, you're probably going to get arrested if something like that happens, if you hit the other person. And of course, you shouldn't be arrested and you're defending yourself. But unfortunately, we have to live in the real world. And in the real world, many times, I don't know about most times or even generally, but many, many times, the police will arrest you anyway. And then, then it's up to you to formulate your defense later, right? So this is what's called an affirmative defense. Somebody starts coughing and sneezing on you, and you pop them. You just pop them in the face, the jaw, what have you. You assault them, you beat them up. You're like outraged, out of a sense of outrage. Okay, and then you end up getting prosecuted for assault, for battery. There is a type of assault that is a strike, which is terrible because under the 3 strikes law, it comes with all kinds of punishment enhancements and something, and that's called assault with a deadly weapon, or assault with intended or likely to produce great bodily injuries. This is a big deal. You really have to know how to conduct yourself, and you have to know what defense to use. You might be on the inside, you might be in custody, you may not even get a chance to find a good private defense counsel, defense attorney, and so then you're scrambling for how to defend yourself. So God forbid something like that were to happen. And if I was in that situation, or I'm defending a client in that situation, I think there's a very viable self-defense argument to be made. Okay, so self-defense is not free reign to just beat or assault other people and then just claim self-defense. It's not that simple. The jury is going to look at the facts. The facts are everything. The facts govern your entire interaction with the judicial system. Okay. And unfortunately, if you don't have a good investigator, you don't have witnesses who are on your side, those facts can be skewed against you, right? Witnesses can lie and all that. So it's going to be incumbent on you. It's going to behoove you. It's in your best interest. Get yourself a good investigator. Make sure your lawyer investigates, has a good investigator, because the facts rule all. That is the overarching thing. Okay. Even obviously the law is important and all that, but it doesn't matter how powerful defenses there may be out there. If you can't you can't avail yourself of those defenses because the facts aren't on your side. Excuse my French, but you are fucked, right? So it's very critical that the facts show that you were in fact defending yourself. So I'm going to read to you some of the very basic rudimentary elements for a successful self-defense argument. Okay, so if somebody coughs on you or is in the process of doing so, and you're prosecuted, and after you have already beat this person up and all that, you must have held the reasonable belief that you were in imminent danger of suffering bodily injury or being touched unlawfully. Okay, so if I'm your attorney, right, and obviously if the facts show this, and this other person is in the throes of coughing at you, probably saying they're going to infect you with the virus or whatever, whether or not they end up testing positive or not, that's largely irrelevant, because, right, I mean, it's all about you. It's all about what's reasonable, what your state of mind is at the time. It's reasonably assumable that person may have the virus, so you're defending yourself. And so my argument there would be that you were in danger of continuing to be coughed on, continuing to be exposed to this very deadly, horrific pulmonary disorder of the coronavirus. Okay, but that isn't enough. You also you must have held a reasonable belief that the immediate use of force was needed, right, to defend yourself against that danger. So meaning, it's not a situation you just talk yourself out of. Somebody who's doing that to you, somebody who's coughing or sneezing at you or touching your face to make you think, or to terrorize, and you're thinking they're exposing you to the virus, you probably are not going to be able to talk sense into them. So obviously you did what you had to do, and then the prosecutor is saying that you overstepped your hand. And I would say you didn't overstep your hand at all, because that was really the only way. It was necessary for you to shove this person, to use physical force. In these situations, it's almost like reflexive. Your reptilian brain almost takes over, and it becomes a matter almost of life or death. So I think I think that element can be met in a situation like that. And a third, last and most certainly not least, is the force that you used must have been reasonably necessary to defend against a danger. I mean, you can't, coughing on you and then you pull a gun or a knife. I mean, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to prove that responding to, although I'm going to caveat that one, that actually is an interesting question. But generally speaking, it's going to be a hell of a tough argument to make that it was necessary for you to shoot or kill or stab or whatever, use lethal or semi-lethal force. However, if something like that were to have happened to you and you're finding yourself at the, let's say, this thing escalates into a homicide or something like that, the argument, it's a stretch. It is a stretch, but the argument can be made that now, again, this is coming back to the facts. So, for example, if you're somebody with an underlying condition, maybe you're a slightly older person, although this virus can get anybody. People, young and old alike have died. But if you had a pre-existing condition, you introduce evidence of that, your lawyer introduces evidence, whether it's hypertension, diabetes, whatever, some sort of immunocompromised state in which you find yourself, where a coronavirus exposure can be deadly to you, maybe not deadly to somebody else, but deadly to you, and you used deadly force in the midst of somebody who was coughing at you, especially if that person was physically imposing, looked as though, they might have escalated it to something even worse. Again, back to the facts of the situation, right? So it's not impossible. It'd be difficult, but not impossible to argue that under those circumstances, and given the lethality, the potentially fatal nature of a coronavirus infection and diagnosis, you had to use lethal force because this thing can kill you, right? I mean, granted, not there on the spot, but if you're exposed to that, you're contaminated, unless you thwart this person off. And in those very specific circumstances that you found yourself in, that was really the only way out. I really wouldn't put a lot of confidence in that sort of a defense under those circumstances, but a very aggressive, very good lawyer with a great investigator can really, could possibly very strongly muster up that sort of factual argument, and you could be, acquitted or at least not convicted of murder, which is, that's the irony of this whole thing, right? You're defending yourself in that process precisely because you want to avoid the coronavirus, and then you end up getting locked up and getting confined and then contracting the coronavirus that way. So that's just, that's one of those ironies of life. Anyway, so nothing that I said is legal advice. Don't rely on it to conduct yourself in life. This is just my understanding of the law of self-defense in California, but I'm getting a lot of people asking me all sorts of questions regarding the intersection of the coronavirus pandemic and the law. Is people lose their shit. They lose their minds and they do crazy things, or they find themselves on the other end of a very mentally deranged person, or a psychotic or whatever. And that's just how it is when you're dealing with a pandemic, when you're dealing with a contagion of the magnitude of this coronavirus. All kinds of scenarios are going to play out, and the courts actually are going to have to deal with that. These are coronavirus is a novel coronavirus, or some of these issues, some of the way these factual things, how they play out, can be somewhat novel. But a good attorney can use the existing law as long as you've got a great investigator, or that attorney has a great investigator, to summon the facts in such a way that they meet the elements of the defenses, and you're out of this terrible trouble. Okay, stay safe, and visit us at coimbralaw.com if you have questions, you want to get a hold of me, or just type in lawyerinmyarea.com. Okay, stay safe.